I was planning to do my cross-examination with the mute on.
We're all for it.
Yeah, okay. I did turn on YouTube, by the way, so everybody on their best behavior.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just just for everyone's awareness, John Zimmer, who was with us yesterday, is logging in remotely today. I believe he might be in the waiting room.
Sorry.
We're all for it. Had a long drop.
Were you hearing some strange recording going on? Anyway, never mind. I fixed the problem.
Greetings, Mr. Zimmer. Can you hear all of us, or can you hear me?
I can hear you well, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I can hear you fine. Does anyone have any preliminary matters before we go into cross-examination?
We do not.
Okay, so I don't hear anything from my side of the bench. Then why don't we go back on the record? Again, my name is Robert Shea. This is the second day of evidentiary hearings in the EFSB 22-07, the petition of Holyoke Gas and Electric Department. With me from the Siting Division staff is our Director, Andrew Green, our General Counsel, Joan Foster Evans, our Assistant Director, Wayne Wong, and Energy Analyst, Nathaniel Strasberg. Mr. Avery, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and the other people who are present.
Yes, James Avery from the law firm of Pierce Atwood. Also with the Holyoke Gas Electric Department, James Lavelle, Brian Roy, and Kate Sullivan-Craven. Jay Gamble, lead engineer or company engineer, also here, and John Zimmer from Epsilon Associates on the screen.
Thank you. Unless someone has anything preliminary, why don't we just resume? Why don't I just let Mr. Green resume his cross-examination? We ended with Mr. Green's cross-examination unfinished last night, so why don't we resume?
Thank you. Good morning, panel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we're going to more or less pick up on the topic that we were on yesterday, which you may have surmised was about project need. That's pretty much going to be the focus of my questions for today, although I will get into project alternatives a little bit as well. So I'd like to start by asking you to look at the response to EFSB-CPC-1. And there is a statement in that response, and I'll read it into the record. It says, the construction and operation of the tank will have minimal environmental impacts. The tank itself will not increase the use of natural gas, but merely add reliability by achieving on-site storage. Can you confirm that that is in fact in your response? I believe that's in the last paragraph.
Thank you. Yes, we find that.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is sort of compare that statement to the questions that were being asked and answered yesterday regarding the Sanborn Head report that was I guess it's called the FEED study, which is a feasibility study of the project that was performed in 2022. And as we were discussing yesterday, that report contained a comment that indicated that with the project, there would be an increase of LNG truck deliveries to the West Holyoke LNG facility of 28%. And then over the years, that would sort of taper off as electrification took hold. So these are two different.
Just to confirm, Mr. Green, just to confirm, that response talks about the delivery of LNG as compared to natural gas.
That's right. That's right. Correct. There's no other gas that can be delivered to the West Holyoke LNG facility, right?
No, but there is two different forms of gas, liquid and vapor, that can be delivered to Holyoke.
Okay. So, all right, just for clarity, again, 28% increase in LNG truck deliveries following commissioning of the project, at least according to Sanborn Head. Are you in agreement with that?
I'm in agreement that that's what it states from the information response and the report written by Sanborn Head, not HG&E.
Okay. So if the deliveries of LNG to the West Holyoke facility are increasing by 28% on average per year, is it necessary to assume that there's also going to be an increase of 28% in the vaporization and injection of LNG into the distribution system? Or, where does that extra gas go?
This is Brian Roy from Holyoke. So to clarify, the FEED study was a report generated as a front-end engineer design by Sanborn Head. When HG&E filed the petition, this portion of the report was not included as it does not reflect the intended operation. It was merely speculation on the project and complementary site work being proposed to be taken on at the same time as the tank work. The tank itself is strictly to address the project need, which is intended to serve existing customers with a reliable source of supply. Given that during our peak conditions, we have approximately 2 days of storage on site and require routine scheduling of deliveries to maintain reliable source of supply, and that provides little margin of error. A tank itself does not increase any consumption beyond any passive vaporization that occurs within the tank due to heat loss. Over the course of an annual period, with the new tank itself would likely result in an increase of 3 to 4 LNG deliveries per year. The number in the report of 28% is more or less based on the number shared yesterday regarding up to 1,000 decatherms per peak day if any targeted application were able to receive natural gas as a result of the complementary site work of the vaporization system work, not the tank itself. And under an extreme scenario in which we experienced 21 extended peak events, applying that to the 28% increase and the 1,000 decatherms per day, that's where that volume is. So it is an extremely conservative estimate thrown in the FEED study over an aggregate period and not reflective of an annual increase, but more a worst case scenario. However, it does not account for any reductions in emissions that would have been gained through the complementary site work unrelated to the tank project, which again, the tank itself would not increase emissions, but more or less result in approximately 3 to 4 deliveries per year just to maintain the volume of the tank as a result of boil off from heat loss.
Could I just ask one clarifying question? I know it's early for redirect, but just to help facilitate the development of the record, you talked about a worst case. How many additional truck deliveries would be experienced if the system was operating in last year's more mild weather conditions?
During last year's more mild conditions, during the winter period, there would have been 0 additional deliveries to the site.
So again, Sanborn Head feed report indicates an average annual number of LNG trailer deliveries of 100. That may be a little higher than what the company has put forward, but with 100 truck deliveries per year and their estimate of a 28% increase in annual LNG trailer deliveries to the facility, that sounds to me like 28 extra trailer deliveries. No?
This is Brian Roy. Again, no, that is, again, over a 10-year period, what the aggregate increase would be, could be, not would be, but could theoretically be. However, with the adoption of electrification, that number is expected to be lower. And again, this was not included in the petition as it was not reflected of what HG&E anticipates as part of the project.
I don't mean to quibble, but this report was obviously prepared by a professional engineering consulting firm retained by Holyoke Gas and Electric for a fairly significant purpose of estimating the feasibility of constructing and costing out this facility. So that this doesn't seem like a casual study that was done by a rogue consultant. This was something that the company commissioned and submitted to the board in response to discovery. Is the company disavowing the accuracy of the study or taking exception to it?
No, the company, this is Brian Roy, the company is merely providing additional insight into the presentation material following the questions received by the siting board. Again, we model our system conservatively, and this number presents a very conservative estimate over a 10-year period. It is not a reflection of an annual increase, but merely a reflection of over a 10-year period, what could theoretically be experienced as part of the targeted approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for our community when there are not cost competitive alternatives available for electrification opportunities.
All right, well, we can park this question for the moment because I think we're going to address it in the next few questions. Referring to exhibit EFSB-N-2, there is a statement made in that response that the company, I'll quote, the company has been fortunate that TGP, Tennessee Gas Pipeline, has a history of reliable service and has not curtailed the firm capacity on a given day based on available records over the prior 10 years. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
So could one infer from that statement that there has been no degradation in the reliability of Tennessee Gas Pipeline as a supplier to the company?
This is Brian Roy. Tennessee Gas has maintained reliable supply and has thankfully continued to provide reliable supply. However, we model our system assuming potential for risk and how we can mitigate those efforts.
I'm sorry, how we can mitigate what?
Those risks, or how we can mitigate those risks.
So is there anything on the Tennessee Gas Pipeline side of the supply picture for Holyoke Gas and Electric that increases the need for LNG on the system? Again, specifically with respect to the performance of Tennessee Gas Pipeline as a gas supplier.
This is Brian Roy. There are mechanical systems in operation on Tennessee's system that, as with any mechanical system, could have a malfunction that impacts the ability to reliably serve their customers and result in curtailments to downstream users. With that said, there's also the risk for third-party damage to Tennessee gas pipeline systems from external excavations that could also damage or could impact their ability to reliably serve end users. In light of these risks, Holyoke Gas and Electric has the LNG facility in place to mitigate any potential supply disruptions. Even though a supply disruption has not occurred, the risk still remains, and HG&E must remain prepared to reliably serve its customers in the event that an unfortunate incident or curtailment could occur.
So you're talking about contingency scenarios where something bad might happen either to Tennessee or through some third-party damage to their system that creates a bit of a crisis, right? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Roy?
This is Brian Roy. The contingency scenario is part of our risk analysis, so yes.
Has there been any change in the company's philosophy about being prepared to address contingencies going back prior to the past 10 years? Or, since the last 10 years, let's say? I would assume that contingency risks and risks in general have always been on the mind of system planners at the company. Is that a new phenomenon or something that has been around for quite some time?
This is Brian Roy. That has been around since the company began receiving pipeline gas in the 1950s. At the onset of receipt of pipeline gas, the company installed propane air systems to supplement system demand in the event of a pipeline failure risk. The company then in the 60s increased its propane storage as system demand increased, again, as a contingency plan in the risk of pipeline failure, to the point where in the 1960s, Tennessee Gas had an issue in the winter, and HG&E's annual report did state that the contingency of propane air supply to maintain system operations was able to avoid the risk of curtailment to HG&E's customers, whereas other systems had to curtail supply to their end users. Again, that's 50 years ago, but it shows that having a contingency plan in place to have backup to reliably serve our customers has long been a part of our resource planning.
Was the incident that you're referring to where propane helped achieve continuing reliability, was that prior to the installation of the West Holyoke LNG facility?
This is Brian Roy. Yes, that was a few years prior to the installation of the West Holyoke facility.
So is it fair to say that the LNG facility as it is currently configured essentially is providing the function that the propane air system performed in the 60s?
This is Brian Roy. Both systems were maintained operational in tandem up until the decommissioning of the propane in the early 2000s as a result of the analysis, the resource planning at the time. As with any system, long-term needs change over time, and that's why resource planning and analyses is ongoing as system needs change. The company at the time felt it was beneficial to maintain two systems when the LNG facility was installed in the 1970s, and in the early 2000s, as part of our commitment to cleaner energy and where system projection was forecasted at the time, it was deemed appropriate to retire.
I'm sorry. Where what was forecasted at the time?
Where system demand was forecasted, for future outlook was forecasted at the time, it was deemed appropriate to retire this propane air system and also provide the environmental benefits of cleaner natural gas versus propane, which has higher emissions. Again, system needs change over time, and our system experienced growth in the late aughts after the retirement of that facility due to rising costs of oil, as well as our customers' concerns over more affordable energy and potential greenhouse gas reductions. And we essentially saw a higher take on the natural gas system over that time, which, again, as part of the future planning, indicated additional concerns, which the analysis had addressed as part of the MOU with Columbia, as well as following that cancellation, the addressing of this project as a need to, again, continue reliable service, particularly to our existing customers.
Can you just describe the MOU with Columbia Gas of Massachusetts, now Eversource Gas?
Sure. So when the MOU, this is Brian Roy, when the MOU was executed in 2017, it was under the pretense that Holyoke Gas and Electric would release its capacity on the Northampton lateral and would then redirect that capacity to the main Tennessee line in Agawam. Following that, Columbia Gas of Massachusetts would upgrade existing infrastructure from Agawam to an existing interconnect in Holyoke and would provide that redirected supply, as well as an additional 5,000 decatherms of firm daily capacity to increase Holyoke's daily capacity off of the Tennessee gas pipeline for delivery into its system. That would in turn result in decreased reliance upon LNG for Holyoke's system, as firm capacity on the main Tennessee gas line and not the capacity constrained lateral would increase reliability based on historical performance. It would not negate the need for the existing LNG facility, as HG&E would still, as with past practice, have contingency plans in place for supplemental supply. In return for this redirection of the capacity, Columbia Gas would be able to receive the equivalency of Holyoke's firm capacity at its Northampton gate station meter, which is north of Holyoke on the Northampton lateral, which would have addressed capacity concerns for their system on the same capacity constrained lateral. However, following the Merrimack Valley incident in 2018, Columbia Gas reevaluated their project approach, and rather than focus on any projects that could be deemed a expansion project, they shifted their focus more towards reliability projects, and as a result, cut the portion of the project that would have met the needs of Holyoke and been in agreement with the terms of the MOU. Therefore, the current project that Columbia Gas has on file with the siting board does not address the needs of HG&E.
And is that MOU no longer in effect?
This is Brian Roy. That is correct. The MOU is no longer in effect. That was canceled in early 2019, which led to the institution of HG&E's moratorium.
I'm sorry, which led to the institution of what?
Holyoke Gas and Electric's moratorium. And the MOU had a targeted in-service date of November of 2019. So the cancellation abruptly is what led to the institution, again, of our moratorium.
Thank you. So I'd like to refer to EFSB-N-13.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good. And the response indicates that Holyoke Gas and Electric is no longer able to rely on what are called overtakes on the Tennessee system. can you explain what an overtake is? And second, what why it's no longer possible to rely on them for supplies?
Yes, this is Brian Roy. Yes, I can address that. So an overtake is considered an event in which the pipeline company allows an end user to receive more volume than it currently has capacity rights for. And these instances are rare in the sense that it is based on the overall system demand of all customers on Tennessee's system. So requests can be made. However, the pipeline company has to evaluate all firm capacity delivery rights, as well as any other delivery rights that have been made for that particular gas day, and determine if all capacity rights are fully subscribed for that day, then no capacity is available. If not every system is experienced in a peak event, there may be additional capacity on a segment of the system that allows for a temporary overtake. So in the 2017-18 period, as explained on page 3-8 of the analysis, HG&E was fortunate to be able to utilize overtakes from Tennessee Gas Pipeline following requests between 500 decatherms and 1,000 decatherms per day. As shown in table 3.4, this allowed HG&E to maintain reliable service given some weather challenges, as evidenced by the LNG truck deliveries shown in table 3.4, particularly on day 5, where 0 trucks were received due to weather events. The cancellation of these trucks is what led to the 10 trucks on day 7, just highlighting, again, the need for additional storage as well. However, because the overtakes are related to every end user's nomination and system need, Tennessee cannot ever guarantee that there may be capacity available. For example, in 2019, HG&E did request an overtake on one day, given there may have been a potential interruption for one LNG truck delivery, and Tennessee Gas rejected that request because they did not have available capacity to meet the commitment of the customer nominations across their system.
Has the ability to receive an overtake always been on a best effort basis of Tennessee, or has there ever been any obligation or expectation that they would provide that service when requested?
This is Brian Roy. It is on a best effort basis only and can never be guaranteed as a result.
So has there been really any change in their behavior, or is this just there was, one instance where it was requested and denied, and that was somehow quite different from historical precedent?
This is Brian Roy. The 2017-18 overtake was more the anomaly than the 2019 denial.
Has the company made any overtake requests within the last year that have been denied?
This is Brian Roy. No, there has not been a need for any overtake requests in the past year.
No requests.
This is Brian. There's been no request nor a need for a request.
So when was the last time that the company did make an overtake request that was granted?
This is Brian Roy. The last request was in the 2017 and 18 time period, as shown in table 3.4.
Has there been, if the company could have received overtakes since that time period, would it have made the request?
This is Brian Roy. The overtakes are purely for emergency purposes only, and HG&E did not have any events that necessitated an emergency request for an overtake from Tennessee during that period.
Is there any additional fee involved in making an overtake request, whether it's granted or not?
This is Brian Roy. No, there's no additional fee required associated with request. However, again, as stated by many agencies, pipeline capacity is scarce in the region, and it's becoming scarcer and scarcer. So the likelihood and anticipation of overtakes is decreasing as a result.
So again, just to make sure I understand, the last request made was 20, what was the year?
This is Brian Roy, 2019.
So approximately 4 years ago.
Correct.
Does that suggest that there have not been emergency conditions on the system in that 4-year period?
This is Brian Roy. That suggests that there have not been conditions beyond HG&E's normal system planning to require this emergency request. The planning and scheduling of LNG deliveries during this period has been, while challenging, through the efforts of the team, able to meet the shifting demands over time given weather experience in the area.
So if overtake capacity is scarce on very cold days, is there any ability of Holyoke to bid for that scarce resource and secure it at perhaps somewhat higher cost?
Again, this is Brian Roy. There is no ability to bid for that capacity as the Northampton lateral is fully subscribed and capacity constrained. All available capacity on the Northampton lateral is assigned to end users, and therefore there's no bid opportunity or open season for that matter to achieve or obtain that potential scarce supply.
I thought I understood your description of the overtake provision to sort of take in the totality of local distribution company demands on the pipeline, pretty much up and down the pipeline, not just on the lateral.
This is Brian Roy again. Yes, it takes into account the entire operation of their system. However, the lateral itself remains capacity constrained and there's no new available capacity. The only instance in which capacity could be available for an overtake is if the end users of the Northampton lateral do not utilize their contracts. However, since we are all operating within the same region and experience the same events, and our systems essentially have the same peaking needs, in the instances under peak conditions in which HG&E would require an overtake, these systems are already operating at their capacity as well, and therefore the ability to overtake would not be present.
Am I correct that overtakes are different than what are sometimes called balancing provisions to sort of
This is Brian Roy. Yes, overtakes are different than balancing.
in what sense?
This is Brian Roy again. An overtake is an ability to deliver more capacity to your meter than you have contracted rights for. Balancing is a monthly action in which the Tennessee Gas Pipeline and utility will square up any minor differences in deliveries versus nominations.
Does balancing offer any opportunity for the company to get more gas on critical cold days?
This is Brian Roy. No.
All right, let's turn to the response to EFSB-G-3.
Okay, please proceed. Thank you.
So I'm going to read part of the response where it states, quote, on January 4th, 2022, City Councilor at Large, Kevin Jourdain, filed an order with the City of Holyoke City Council, which stated in part, quote, the Holyoke Gas and Electric Company be requested to take all necessary steps to end the gas moratorium, end quote. Subsequently, Holyoke Gas and Electric was invited to present an update at the September 12 Holyoke City Council Finance Committee meeting, where we discussed the potential LNG infrastructure and resiliency project. All feedback was favorable and encouraging. Should one read that statement and understand that the LNG project that we're reviewing right now was in fact designed, at least in part, to end the gas moratorium?
This is Brian Roy. No, the LNG project that you are reviewing is the tank project, which is designed to serve the existing customers with increased reliability and support. The additional information presented to the City Council included the complementary work, including the vaporization system with built-in redundancy that would allow for targeted additions when the electric alternative is not a cost-effective method to proceed with.
So you're distinguishing the redundant vaporization capacity upgrade principally from the additional tank aspect of this project.
This is Brian Roy. That is correct.
You must be reading between the lines, because I really don't see that characterization in the description of the order that was apparently approved by the City of Holyoke City Council. I'm just curious how you're distinguishing between those two aspects of the scope of work.
Mr. Green, if I may, this is Kate Craven. HG&E had nothing to do with the way that was worded. Councilor Jourdain put that on the agenda for the City Council without HG&E having any input. So the City Council and the city in general has been concerned about reliability and the moratorium. So that the way that was written was not written by HG&E.
Would you agree that it does seem suggestive of an interpretation that the LNG project that we're reviewing has something to do with ending the moratorium?
Mr. Green, this is Jim Lavelle. I think the lens through which the city councilor was viewing the issue at that time was in light of a few significant economic development projects that the city lost because of natural gas. So his focus was primarily on economic development and creating jobs and expanding the tax base. I don't think, honestly, he understood the distinction. We were moving on a parallel path with the reliability solution when he put this language together.
Since you have a little feedback here, since you've alluded to the vaporization rebuild, which is not technically part of the project that the siting board is reviewing, can you explain what that is all about and why you believe that that has something to do with relieving some of the constraints of the moratorium?
This is Brian Roy. The existing vaporization system currently consists of a vaporizer and 4 boilers designed to heat a propylene glycol solution that then warms up the
I'm sorry, to
liquefied-
heat I'm sorry, could not hear you. To heat a what?
It heats an antifreeze solution to then warm up the liquefied natural gas to convert it into a vapor. The existing boiler systems have no redundancy, and there's no redundancy to the existing vaporization system. Therefore, there remains single points of failure with the existing vaporization system. As HG&E has demonstrated in the analysis, the need for the project and the need for our system is to provide reliability for our system. Eliminating single points of failure is another effort to address reliability. The complementary vaporizer work includes redundant vaporization as well as a redundant boiler so that if one component fails, the system does not suffer and service can continue reliably without interruption.
I believe you testified yesterday, Mr. Roy, that the project, and I think maybe we can add in the vaporizer to your remarks, does not increase the hourly vaporization or injection capacity of the West Holyoke LNG facility in total. Is that correct?
This is Brian Roy. The project does not increase the vaporization, as the new vaporizer will have the same hourly output rating as the existing.
And that's 750 decatherms per hour. Is that correct?
This is Brian Roy. It's 750 MCF an hour, but almost equivalent to 750 decatherms, slightly different.
So even with redundant vaporizers that would be built as part of this upgrade, still only 750 MCF would be injectable per hour.
This is Brian Roy. That is correct for normal operations, yes.
Has the existing first of all, is the existing vaporizer still present? Let me rephrase that. Have the new redundant vaporizers been installed yet?
This is Brian Roy. No, there has been no work performed on the project or complementary site work.
So they are sort of linked to the fate of the additional fifth tank.
This is Brian Roy. That is incorrect. They are part of our long-term plan for installation, regardless the fate of the LNG tank.
So if the siting board were to reject the proposed fifth tank, the company would still add the vaporization redundant capacity.
This is Brian Roy. Yes, the company would still add the vaporization redundant capacity to help address reliability concerns for our system.
Have there been any failures or outages of the existing vaporizer that have prevented the company from dispatching LNG when necessary?
This is Brian Roy. There have been 0 failures of the vaporizer and system that have prevented the ability to meet system demand. However, there have been interruptions due to temporary malfunctions that have highlighted the need for redundancy.
Okay, I'd like to turn back to exhibit EFSB-N-3, table 3.2. Which is the design day forecast between 2018 and 2027, 2028. You there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So this table appears to depict projected design day send out for the system in total, not just LNG, but the whole system for Holyoke Gas and Electric when there is a 68 heating degree day event. Is that right?
That is correct.
And can you tell me what other assumptions go into this calculation? Are we talking about send out on a weekday when businesses are open? Are we talking about weekend conditions? Are we talking about a prolonged cold period where it may sort of accumulate to be a more critical send out need based on a few days of cold weather and a cold snap?
This is Brian Roy. This is based on the assumption that businesses are in operation to their full capacities as historically demonstrated, as well as the impact of a peak event. And as history has shown for HG&E, continued cold events exacerbate system need and is based upon worst case scenario.
I'm sorry, a couple of words dropped out. And as industry has shown for HG&E.
This is based on assuming the businesses are in operation based upon their historical performance during the week. It is assumed that, as our history has shown, repeated cold events in tandem increase demand as well. So this table highlights a worst case scenario during the week with essentially all operations ongoing, as well as heating demand at its peak.
Okay. And this also assumes a continuation of the existing moratorium, correct?
Correct. This assumes the moratorium, and it also assumes our interruptible customer load has been interrupted.
And it appears to no longer reference the pandemic or post-pandemic impacts following the winter of 2022-23. Is that also correct?
That is correct.
So we're sort of back to normal at this point?
That is correct.
Glad to hear it. A little bit of good news there. So could you describe the trend that we see over this 10-year period, given that these are projected values under, pretty much design conditions with some consistency from year to year in terms of the methodology?
Sorry, could you please rephrase the question or clarify? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm asking you to offer an opinion as to what you see here in terms of a trend between 2018 and 2027 in terms of the design day demand.
So this is Brian Roy. The trend does show a decrease in demand on a peak day. Again, with the moratorium, Holyoke Gas and Electric is not experiencing any new load growth. Therefore, the tables show that annually there are slight decreases in peak day demand, and these decreases can be attributed to the efforts of our energy efficiency programs and customers that may have converted to alternative systems. The outlook is based upon the information HG&E has following participation in these programs and annual reviews of the system, and updated accordingly to reflect any potential losses to the system, so that the outlook is reflective of anticipated demand on those peak events.
So if we're not seeing demand growth on design date conditions, are we seeing demand growth on any other conditions that you're aware of?
This is Brian Roy. We have seen demand growth on other conditions because we have added a few interruptible gas customers as a result of the moratorium. And I should highlight that these interruptible customers consume propane when natural gas is not available, and resulting in increased emissions to our community.
I'm sorry, are you saying that yes, there's demand growth, but only with respect to interruptible customers?
This is Brian Roy. There has been demand growth with respect to new customers installing dual fuel systems. So industrial so just industrial load. And again, this model is strictly a forecast based upon available information at the time it is essentially updated.
So I realize that the company, may have attrition of customers, add a few customers selectively, but in aggregate, is the company seeing demand growth on some other period of time beside these design day demand projections? In aggregate.
This is Brian Roy. In aggregate, no, we are not seeing demand growth on the other periods.
Thank you. I believe we've asked in a record request yesterday for the supporting documentation and calculations and inputs that went into table 3.2 and table 3.1 in this response. And if that's not your understanding, I want to clarify that.
That is the company's understanding, and we will get busy on that after the hearings are over.
Take your time. So considering that table 3.2 is predicated on the moratorium's continuation, I'm wondering if the company has another forecast somewhere where it kind of projects, let's call it natural load growth, that if it were not constrained by the moratorium, what demand is actually out there that could be connected to the system that would produce different numbers for design day demand for gas.
This is Brian Royce. Prior to the moratorium, HG&E saw approximately 50 new residential customers per year added to the system and between 1 to 3 business customers per year. On a peak day, the impact would be between 50 and 80 decatherms of increased load for a peak event.
That would be an addition of 50 to 80 decatherms peak day each year that accumulates year on year?
Per peak event per year. Therefore, the average of 6 peak events per year times the high end 80 would result in 240 decatherms in aggregate for peak events a year.
I'm looking more at the progression over time. So are we talking about the company potentially seeing 50 decatherms of incremental peak day load year 1, another 50 year 2, and so on?
This is Brian Roy. Based on historical performance, yes.
Okay. And that you said that was the company's forecasting ballpark prior to the moratorium. So that goes back to pre-2019.
That is correct.
Has the company dusted off that methodology to sort of re-estimate what's out there that could be added to the system without a moratorium?
This is Brian Roy. No, the moratorium essentially restricts the addition of new loads, and without reliability components added to the system.
I'm sorry, and without what? And without what?
Without reliability components added to the system, the company is not considering additional load.
I think as a record request, I would like to ask the company to provide a forecast over the same time period depicted in table 3.2 that shows what the design day demand forecast is or would be without a moratorium impinging on demand.
Would that, just a clarification, Mr. Green, would that have assumed that the moratorium never went into effect, such that there had been load growth during the years subsequent to the imposition of the moratorium, and then going forward?
No, I wouldn't go back and reinvent history. I would, for the purposes of this question, assume we are where we are, and that from this point forward, the moratorium ceases to exist.
The company will provide that information and will explain the assumptions that went into it in its response as well.
Okay, that will be record request RR-EFSB-13. Is that what you have, Mr. Avery?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Since today may be our last day of hearings, I'd just like to at least get some intuition about whether the load growth that may show up in response to this record request is coming from residential customers, commercial customers, industrial. How would you sort of break it down in terms of where the load growth is to be harvested?
This is Brian Roy. As part of the update, we will share information as to the increase by load sector for the record request.
Do you have any sort of preliminary assumptions or expectations about that, kind of pie chart breakdown?
This is Brian Roy. Based on the requests we have received since the moratorium for natural gas interest, it would likely be driven by residential with some business load incorporated. We have seen minimal industrial load requests and more or less business followed by predominantly residential.
So I realize we have maybe a sort of difference of interpretation about whether the project that we are reviewing could lead to a relaxation of the moratorium. But putting that aside, if there is a relaxation and peak load growth does in fact occur in the forecast period, would you regard that load growth as a sufficient and legitimate reason for the siting board to make a finding that the project is needed?
This is Brian Roy. No.
Can you elaborate?
This is Brian Roy. To ensure I answer the question thoroughly, can you please just clarify again?
Sure.
Can we have a moment? Can we just have a moment? I think we can.
We're off the record now. Andy, do you have an idea how much longer you'd like to go?
I probably have enough questions left to go through about noon. But if we take a break, it might be a little longer. And I'm sure we will take a break.
What do you think about 11 o'clock for a break?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Alan's the man you have to ask for permission.
Alan, what do you think about 11 a.m. for a break?
I think that's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for starting a little early for us today.
Sure.
Yes, yes, appreciate that. Okay, let's go back on the record.
Thank you. And Mr. Green, this is Brian Roy. So to follow up on your question, again, for the project, reliability is what's driving the need for this project, not the ability to add customers. If there's any additional benefit that could be seen as a result of the project and complementary work, HG&E will evaluate and utilize it if it fits within our plan. However, the primary focus of the project is the ability to reliably serve our customer base with a resilient source of supply. As LNG currently accounts for over 40% of our need on a peak day, have an additional capacity to support that need is beneficial to addressing reliability concerns for our system.
Does Holyoke Gas and Electric produce supply and forecast plans that are submitted to the DPU Gas Division for review?
This is Brian Roy. No.
Are you familiar with the process that's used by other LDCs in the state?
This is Brian Roy. Yes, we are familiar with the process.
So would it surprise you to hear that in the most recent forecast that the department has reviewed and approved of some of the LDCs that adjoin the Holyoke service area, such as Eversource Gas, they are still continuing to show forecasted peak day demand increases?
This is Brian Roy. I cannot speak to their systems. I can only speak to Holyoke Gas and Electric system, and we have not seen peak increases as a result of our moratorium.
So with regard to the moratorium, since again, there seem to be, from my estimation, conflicting bits of information in the record about whether the moratorium is going to be maintained or perhaps not maintained based on expectations of Councilor Jourdain, among others, and the Sanborn Head report as another point of reference. But nevertheless, you've maintained that the moratorium is going to be continued and is not going away, right?
This is Jim Lavelle, Mr. Green. We don't have a concrete plan right now, pending the outcome of this proceeding. We will finalize a plan, but we have discussed a relaxing of the moratorium, if possible. And that would only include, as Brian has mentioned, candidates that are not eligible for other cost competitive alternatives. There's really no cleaner solution that's cost competitive. We would entertain that, but we're not going to lift. There's not going to be a complete lift of the moratorium because we have to meet and comply with the state's climate goals through 2050. So what we have talked about is trying to target current oil heating customers and current propane heating customers where we could make a community benefit. If we can add those to our system and clean up the community, then we're going to seriously try to do that.
So you're talking about you are talking about a relaxation of the moratorium and selective load additions.
That's accurate.
What percentage of the community still uses propane or oil for heating?
This is Brian Roy. Currently, following our recent analysis, 17% of the community currently uses oil or propane for heating, which is the equivalent of approximately 2,500 customers.
And does that include residential, commercial, and industrial, or what's the breakdown there?
This is Brian Roy. That is purely residential.
Are there commercial customers or industrial customers that also use oil for heating that would not be susceptible to interruptible service?
Yes, Mr. Green, this is Kate Craven. We do have commercial and industrial customers using oil and propane, and we're in the process right now of working with UMass Amherst on identifying that data so that we can use it to market air source heat pumps to customers.
All right. So I think Mr. Lavelle's comment confirmed by Mr. Roy that for those customers who are using oil or propane, the company might in fact be interested in hooking them up to firm gas service with increased capacity on the system, that the moratorium is not a sort of hard and fast constraint that the company is proposing or expects to perpetuate.
This is Brian Roy. That is only assuming there, as Mr. Lavelle had stated, that there's no cost justifiable alternative, as well as that it's only, the implication does not fall in line with how we're looking at it. Again, it's unrelated to the tank and merely based upon addressing reliability need, that if reliability is increased, that there is a potential to help the community by reducing greenhouse gas emissions through a targeted approach.
Would I be correct that if the company is going to use some type of an economic screening criteria as to whether to attach new customers to the system, that pretty much 100% of the time, if they burn oil or propane, there is absolutely 100% with certainty going to be an economic advantage to the customer and an environmental benefit to the planet?
Sorry, could you please clarify, Director?
Yeah. Are there any circumstances, I'm rephrasing it in the negative, I guess. Are there any circumstances where a customer using oil or propane would not see an economic benefit getting firm gas service from the company and would not produce an environmental benefit?
This is Brian Wright.
Imagine such a case?
This is Brian Wright. I do not believe that there would be a case in which there cannot be an economic or environmental benefit as a result.
Okay. So it sounds like if that's the screening criteria that the company uses to selectively relax the moratorium, you could drive an LNG tanker through that one, right?
Mr. Green, this is Kate Craven, just to clarify a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about our energy efficiency programs and our incentives for air source heat pumps. We are developing targeted campaigns to those oil and propane customers to push them towards air source heat pumps. There's a case we talked about yesterday where we got an application for a 3-family home in our low-income district, and to put in air source heat pumps in that home, it was going to be $100,000. To purchase that home, it probably would have been $150,000. So just to scale, the cost of air source heat pumps in some of these older stock buildings can be a challenge. So in exceptional cases like that, we may be able to provide a gas service. But we are really working, our green team works really hard to develop incentives that make air source heat pumps economical. And I know there's state incentives and also federal incentives coming through the IRA that we'll be able to promote to our customers as well. So I just wanted to seem like we're going to open the floodgates and allow every customer, residential customer that wants gas to get gas. We're working hard to make sure they're making a commitment to a heating system that's going to get them to 2050 goals. So, so I just want to clarify a little bit that it will be the exception, not the rule.
That's a 3-family home for $150,000.
Move to Holyoke.
I'm thinking that right now, especially with the moratorium going away. So anyway,
Clarify that for the record, it's not going away. Just to have that reflected, please.
that's your testimony. So I'm just trying to sort of, again, align what Ms. Craven and Sullivan?
Whatever, yes. It's
Whatever.
all of the names.
Kate just said with what you said, Mr. Roy, yesterday about even with the moratorium in place and not being able to offer gas, your diligent efforts to convince would-be customers to use heat pump technology has resulted in single-digit numbers of whole house heat pump installations and a paltry 3% success rate. Did I get that right?
This is Brian Wright. That is correct. The 3% success rate relates to customers who requested gas service for a heating system, and 3% of those are the ones that had elected to proceed with air source heat pumps.
Okay, so again, if the past is indicative of the future and the success rate remains in low or moderate single-digit percentages, it sounds like if the company is going to try and lead people to heat pumps rather than seeking gas service, it may have a far greater demand for additional gas service than takers on the heat pump side. Is that a fair characterization?
This is Brian Roy. So based on past precedent, it is currently a challenge. However, the Green Team works tirelessly to continue to educate and promote heat pump technologies. And as Ms. Craven had detailed, I believe yesterday, a recent survey conducted of the customers who have installed air source heat pumps has provided favorable feedback in most cases. And this information will be helpful in continuing to educate the benefits of air source heat pumps for our community and should help promote greater adoption over time. We are certainly early onset of adoption of electrification, and with any new technology, or I wouldn't say new, as air source heat pumps are not new, but they've continued to improve. As any technology matures, it takes time for end users to become familiar, to adopt those technologies and become comfortable. And we work hard to continue to educate the customers on the benefits of these improved technologies. And as they continue to improve, we anticipate greater participation from our constituents, which ideally, as these technologies improve, costs should also likely come down and provide a more economical solution.
I think the company has stated throughout the proceeding that the moratorium is not a good thing. It produces some undesirable outcomes in terms of economic impacts for customers, economic development impacts for the community, and environmental impacts for everybody. Is that true?
This is Brian Roy. Yes, that is true.
Has the company offered any quantification of what those impacts might be?
This is Brian Roy. The company has not offered the quantification of those impacts at this time through any of the information requests.
Okay, I'd like to make that a record request, which is both a 5-year and 10-year projection of the impact of continuation of the gas moratorium on the number of customers that would be incrementally using oil and propane rather than gas, the economic impacts to those customers in aggregate, and the economic development impacts to the community if they can be quantified. Does that seem clear?
Yes, that seems clear.
This is Jim Lavelle, Mr. Green. When you say the economic impact for the customers that are currently on oil and propane, I think the greater economic development impact is on the customers that do not come here because of the natural gas. And we do have some information we can provide you on that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm sort of looking for a holistic, thoughtful answer to this question of basically what is the impact of the moratorium over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of how many customers would have chosen gas but were not able to do so because of the moratorium, and as a result, what the environmental and financial impacts are to those customers and the community.
Okay.
So it's not a simple methodology, I realize, but that's the concept that I'm driving at.
So that would be RR, I'm sorry. That would be record request RR-EFSB-14. And it's now about 11 o'clock. If anyone wants to take a break, it would be a good time to take a short break before we resume. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and I'll see you back here at 11:10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
make up its mind out there today.
I know.
Chilly tonight. It makes an LNG tonight, probably.
Yeah.
Really clear last night, and the moon was,
Yeah, it was.
driving home, I was, it was daylight.
Work during the day right now.
Oh, okay.
Nighttime's getting there, but daytime's slipping by.
Before we start, Jim, did you have to drive all the way home last night and drive out this morning?
Yes,
Ah,
wasn't too bad.
wow.
You have one of those fancy autonomous vehicles that we're talking about with electrification?
Got a flying car.
That would be a thing, to take a little nap while you were being driven from point A to point B.
I thought that's what Uber's all about.
Yeah. I think that would be a little bit long for an Uber ride.
Okay. Why don't we go back on the record? We're back on the record. Mr. Green will resume his cross-examination.
I think I only have one more question about the moratorium, and then we're going to move on to other exciting topics. I've heard, again, different things on the likelihood of the moratorium or the sort of degree of the moratorium in the future as the company sees it. I'm just wondering, since the comment has been made that the moratorium has some relevance to the company achieving 2050 net zero targets as part of the state's climate plan, would the company favor board approval of the project with the condition that the moratorium must remain in place?
Can I answer that question, since it sounds like a legal question?
Would you like to answer it or take it as a record request?
Even better, we'll take it as a record request.
Mr. Shea, is that acceptable?
That sounds fantastic. I think, let me just check. I'm just writing it down. That would be RR-EFSB-15.
Okay, I think I'm now moving into the area of project alternatives, in particular, the use of heat pumps as an alternative to gas service for heating and hot water, just so everybody's prepared. I'd like to direct you to the company's analysis from the petition, Appendix H, as in Harry, at 1. Let me know when you're there.
We are there.
Okay. In this exhibit, the company presents a program of electric distribution upgrades that would be necessary to meet the 2050 climate targets that cost in the neighborhood of $140 million plus or minus 10 to 15 million. Is this what would be required on the company's electric distribution side for full electrification of heating and transportation uses in Holyoke?
This is Jim Lavelle. Yes, that is correct.
And could you distinguish this amount of investment from, let's say, pure condition-based replacements and upgrades? If I recall correctly, some of the equipment that was to be replaced goes back to the 1920s in terms of duct banks and other switch gear and things of that sort. So how much of this is driven by, let's say, electrification as new demand on the electric system versus just obsolescence of equipment?
This is Jim Lavelle.
This is Brian Roy. So the infrastructure that requires update that dates back to the 1920s refers to our High Street corridor, and that reflects $36 million. The remaining portions of the electric distribution system are not of the same vintage and have been updated as needed over time. So the $36 million could be removed from work that is already required, and the remaining would still be required for full electrification and electric vehicles as well.
So that leaves about 100 million plus or minus for that's attributable to electrification needs.
That is correct, based on the 2021 construction estimates, so pre-inflation.
How much of an increase would $100 million of plant, property, and equipment be to Holyoke Gas and Electric's rate base?
That's 5 years worth of operating expenses for our electric division, so it's a significant impact. It would, obviously, the capital would be spread over, multiple years, at least 20 years, but that equates to roughly 5 years of our normal operating expenses for the division.
So can you, again, equate that to a percentage of existing rate base?
I'd be happy to provide it in a records request. I don't have it handy right now.
Okay, let's make it a record request then.
Okay, that would be record request RR-EFSB-16.
My point in asking this question is it does seem like a very substantial number, and Mr. Lavelle, I think you're characterizing it as substantial if it is equivalent to 5 years of operating expenses. So the point being that electrification is not for free in terms of using existing capacity on the electric side of the system, that there's a very significant hurdle to clear in terms of necessary upgrade costs. Is that right?
That's accurate, yeah. Yes.
Okay, let's turn to exhibit EFSB-N-24. There is a statement in that response that says, I quote, while HG&E offers aggressive electrification incentives, the upfront costs associated with whole home air source heat pumps have been a significant deterrent for customers seeking to install these systems. Is that still the company's perspective?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to turn to information that I actually found on the Holyoke Gas and Electric website. I don't think it's in the record, and I would like to make it a record request so we have it formally in the record. I can at least present it now for purposes of discussion as a screen share, if Mr. Shea will allow me to do that.
Yes, I don't know how I could stop you, but go ahead.
Thank you. Let's see if I can find it. I hope everybody's seeing the Holyoke Gas and Electric webpage that says mini split and air source heat pump education. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, I want to commend the company for a very informative website, and this page in particular is a real standout. So I'd like to get the entire contents of this particular web page that I'm displaying on the share screen into evidence. Can we make that a record request?
That'll
Mr.
be
Shea.
all of it's listed in the table of contents as well.
Yeah, the entire page, top to bottom. I'm going to scroll all the way down. This is the bottom of the page. And
Yes, sir.
it starts up here. So maybe
Okay.
just a PDF, if you will, of this webpage would be great to get into the record.
We will provide that.
Okay. So just a general question. Is this information
Can I just
familiar to the witness panel?
Could I just, before answering that question, that'll be 17?
Yes, EW record request RR-EFSB-17.
Sorry for interrupting with that housekeeping matter.
Very important stuff. Thank you. So again, I just want to make sure that the witnesses are familiar with the information before I proceed with questions based on this webpage.
Yes.
Great. And would that be you primarily, Ms. Craven Sullivan?
Yes. As I mentioned, this is Kate Craven. I chair the Green Team, and the Green Team is responsible for this content.
Terrific. So I'm going to scroll down a bit on the page, past all these pretty pictures. That's a heat pump, isn't it?
Yes.
Is this the house, by the way, that you mentioned is for sale in Holyoke?
Upgraded, maybe.
Very nice. Okay, so what I'm looking for, well, actually, I'll stop here for a second because this is a nice schematic diagram of, what a air source mini split heat pump does for what appears to be a sort of typical two-family or two-floor residential structure. Is that right?
Yes.
So the heat pump is circulating some type of a heating or cooling fluid into these air handling units that then blow hot or cold air into the space of the building. Is that correct?
Yes.
And keep it at these various temperatures that are indicated in the circles in each of the rooms. Okay. So here's where I'd really like to focus on the sort of cost comparisons that the company has provided in on this webpage. Does everybody see the table that has annual heating cost comparison of different heating fuels / system types? Is that legible? Or should I make that a little bigger?
I can see it.
We can see it.
I'm going to ask my colleagues if they would like me to expand it a bit. I think I can zoom in if necessary. Are we good?
If you could zoom in a tad, Mr. Green.
Okay. Sure. Let's Give me one. Oops. That may have been a very bad idea. Hold on a second.
You want to preamp on your screen?
I haven't.
Oh.
Oh, I got it.
Let me try one more time. Getting bigger?
Yep.
It
that
is,
works.
yes.
I'm starting to feel like an optometrist now.
We can't,
Okay.
Mr. Green, we can't see the bottom half of the
That's okay. We just, oh, well, I just want to show the top table. So you see where the cursor is encircling right now?
Yes.
Yes?
yes.
Okay, great. So again, this is one of the most useful tables I think I've come across that compares a pretty wide array of space heating options that are available to, I think this is targeted towards residential applications. Is that correct, Ms. Craven?
Yes.
So could you give me a sort of walkthrough of what's being shown on this table?
Yes. So we're just comparing the annual heating cost of different fuel types, and you can see the ductless mini split heat pump, the annual electric use of about 8,000 kWh per year is $1,200, and that would be based on HG&E's electric rate as of June 2023. And then you can see the higher efficiency gas furnace comes after that, and the high efficiency gas boiler, and so on. And these are based on our rates as of June 2023.
So it looks like we have pretty much the gamut of different heating technologies, from air source heat pumps to oil, gas, electric resistance heating of various technologies and efficiency levels, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And does this pretty much cover the gamut in terms of what customers are actually using to heat their homes in Holyoke?
We believe so. Obviously, it's hard to know exactly for sure, but these are, as part of our energy efficiency program, we offer a free energy audit to all residential customers, and this is information that has been derived from some of the audits done at residential homes.
So I look at this chart and I see that air source heat pumps have the lowest annual operating costs, fuel costs, if you will, of any of the depicted heating technologies. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what would you attribute those low relative costs to?
Our electric rates and the efficiencies, of course, of the system.
So for comparison's sake, if we look at electric baseboard resistance heating here, where my cursor is, we see that even though it uses electricity at the company's low rates, as you described it, it still is far more expensive on an annual operating cost basis than a heat pump, about close to 3 times the cost.
Yes.
So does that give us basically an efficiency comparison, that a heat pump is approximately 3 times as efficient as electric baseboard heating?
Yes.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, baseboard heating is almost 100% efficient in that the electricity used is converted, relatively efficiently into thermal energy, right?
Yes.
But a heat pump is still 3 times more efficient than 100% efficiency.
Yes.
Okay. So I assume that despite the cost advantage from an operating standpoint for the heat pump technology, air source heat pump, this alone is not what's going to motivate customers to sign up for a heat pump rather than selecting natural gas, oil, or some other fuel.
Right.
This is Brian Roy. The table below what you're looking at shows the lifetime heating comparison by fuel type as you scroll down. And these factors also contribute to decisions made by customers when determining what type of system to install.
Yep, I'm going to get to that in a moment. I just wanted to ask whether this table on the heating cost comparison captures all of the economic advantages of heat pumps relative to other space conditioning technology.
From a cost perspective, I would say yes.
What about in the summertime? Would the mini split heat pump be capable of providing air conditioning?
Yes.
And what's the alternative technology that customers might use to cool their premises?
Window unit ACs, unfortunately.
Is it unfortunate because the window AC technology is less efficient than the heat pump?
Yes.
So if that is the case, then there would be presumably additional economic benefits to having heat pumps available for cooling as well as heating.
Yes, and we do outline some of those benefits further down on the page.
Okay. All right, let's continue downward. So the next table is titled Lifetime Heating Comparison by Fuel Type. Again, Ms. Craven, could you just walk us through what this table depicts?
Sure. This is the installation and heating costs over 15 years for each type of heating system. And again, this assumes our rates as of June 2023 on both the gas and electric. And so you can see that the new higher efficiency gas boiler is the least cost. And then you scroll down a little bit to the ductless mini split, which has a higher lifetime cost because of the installation cost.
So the darker shading on each of these horizontal bars is the capital cost of installing the equipment, and the lighter shading is the accumulated operating cost over 15 years?
Yes.
Can you describe the methodology that the company used to produce these figures?
I'm sorry, can you please repeat that?
Sure. I'm asking what methodology did the company use to calculate both the capital cost of installation and the 15-year operating cost of the unit?
I would be happy to get you those calculations in a records request. I just don't, I know many of the costs for the systems overall come from an average of the applications that we see for our residential energy conservation program. But I would just want to make sure that I'm giving you the most accurate data. So we could provide backup to this chart in a records request.
That would be great. So let's do that.
Okay, and that would be record request R dash EFSB dash 18.
So these are obviously very precise estimates. They appear to be very precise. What type of a dwelling or residence are we talking about? Is this an average, a median structure in terms of its efficiency, insulation, size, family composition in terms of number of household members? Do you know that, or should we save that for the record request?
I would save that for the records request, if possible.
Sure. But that would be the kind of information that I hope the company can address, so we know what
Yeah.
we're looking at.
Yeah, it does assume the home heating requirement of 80 MMBTU per year, but I would just want to verify exactly the numbers before on that.
And just another methodological question. I assume since we're talking about costs over a 15-year period, that these are actually nominal dollars and have not been discounted for the time value of money. Is that correct?
Yes.
So a more precise economic comparison might in fact use a discounting type of financial methodology. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So one number on this chart really kind of jumped out at me because this describes a situation I'm very familiar with. The new gas steam boiler with an 82% average fuel use efficiency is pretty much exactly the situation I had in 2008 when I replaced an oil steam boiler and put in a new gas steam boiler at this very efficiency level. And as I read the chart, it says that the installation cost for the boiler is $2,678. Is that a correct reading of the chart?
Yes.
I am very impressed that the costs are as low as they are presented here, because if I remember correctly, about 15 years ago, when I put in a boiler of this very description, I probably paid somewhere closer to $6,000 to do the installation, and that was with some shopping around to get a competitive price. So where do these prices come from?
I would be happy to provide that information in the records request.
Yes, I would like to get that, because again, this looks so far out of line with my own personal experience in procuring heating equipment that I'm very curious where these numbers originate.
Just to make sure the records are clear, this is all encompassed within record request RR-EFSB-18.
Thank you.
Anyway, putting aside the question of where the numbers come from and their and you know what source provides the particular values for capital and operating costs, what are we seeing here, Ms. Craven, in terms of the message of this chart?
That the lifetime cost of an air source heat pump, while the cost over an annual period to operate the system may be low, the installation costs are quite a bit higher. And we have a lot of customers calling and asking us for this chart and in this question when they're considering new systems.
So if a customer were looking at this chart, it appears that they would not be making an irrational decision if they decided not to install a mini split heat pump when they needed to install new equipment and, well, yeah, either replacement equipment or even perhaps new equipment in a new structure. Is that right?
If natural gas is available at their residence, then they would have an option to upgrade to a higher efficiency system. But otherwise, the ductless mini split would be their best option over the lifetime of their system.
Speaking of lifetimes, why did the company perform this calculation over a 15-year period and not, say, 20 years or 30 years or 10 years?
The typical life cycle of air source heat pump or a heating system, we were trying to be conservative for our customers to make sure that they could see what the system would cost them over 15 just because it could potentially need to be replaced at year 15.
Is it possible that these heating systems could last longer than 15 years?
Certainly.
Is that a reasonable expectation for all of the technologies?
Sure. Yes. Yes.
Any again, experience in terms of what the average longevity is of these different heating technologies?
I would be happy to outline that in the records request. I know we've had some conversations at our green team about whether this should be 15 years or it should be 20 years when we look at this chart. But because of some of the newer technologies coming in as far as the air source heat pumps go, we decided that 15 years would be the best option for the chart. And I just want to also specify that we have, on the green team, we have an energy efficiency coordinator that we hired in 2020, and she walks through these energy audits with customers and then walks through all of their potential options. And I know I've mentioned that, you know, we're a local utility, but we really try to work hand in hand with our customers to make sure they're making the best decision, both economically and for their household and for the environment. So we don't just put this chart on our website and not, you know, walk through it with our customers when they are looking at these systems.
Right. Well, if let's say your further review of the longevity of heating systems, you know, came to the conclusion that maybe they have a longer lifespan and they last, say, 25 years rather than 15 on average, what would that do to the relative ranking of these different options?
It would certainly change the chart.
In what manner?
I'd have to look at the calculation, but I assume that the ductless mini split may move up in ranking.
Up meaning more cost competitive.
Yes.
Again, I know we'll get an answer to this in the record request, but I am curious, and I don't see in the notes below the chart what is assumed in terms of the applicability of Holyoke Gas and Electric's incentives for these different types of technologies, tax credits that are available from different entities, state or federal governments, or perhaps other incentives that may be provided by manufacturers or other organizations that serve the Holyoke community. Can you give me some sense of what else is going into these capital cost figures?
So, like I said, I will certainly outline that in the records request, but we do have, this is our heat pump education page, so basically just a place for people to understand heat pump technology and start to learn a little bit more about it. We have a separate page for air source heat pump incentives that outline all the tax incentives and in various opportunities through Holyoke Gas and Electric's efficiency program.
So what's your guess as to whether the $23,013 figure for the ductless mini split heat pump is the sort of, let's call it, list price of the equipment or the net price after tax credits and financial incentives?
I would assume it's the list price.
So it might very well be significantly less expensive with those incentives factored in. Is that right?
Yes, I assume.
Would that also be true of the other heating options, that they're list prices rather than net installed cost with tax credits and incentives and things of that sort?
I believe so.
So I think as a additional record request, I would like to have the information in this table revised to present the cost, particularly capital costs, but if there's any operating cost difference, that as well, that reflects tax credits, incentives, or financial inducements to use these different technologies that are available to customers in Holyoke. And I would also like to get, as Mr. Avery is probably going to clarify, the supporting work papers and calculations. Isn't that right, Mr. Avery?
Absolutely.
Okay, that will be record request R-EFSB-19.
All right, I think I can probably stop my share screen now. So give me a moment. Okay. Thank you for, and again, great job on the website. That's honestly, that's probably the most intuitive presentation that I've seen on the question of what different technologies look like from the customer vantage point. So kudos to the company for putting that together and offering that to customers, and us, frankly, we appreciate it. So I want to turn now to the question of the incentives that Holyoke Gas and Electric is offering to its existing and prospective customers to pursue electrification for heating. And I'm going to characterize testimony from yesterday as that the company tries to more or less parallel the incentives that are offered through the Mass Save program, in that the company is not a member of the Mass Save program, but tries to, essentially replicate what that offers to customers, particularly since some of them are in the surrounding communities. Is that a reasonable characterization of the testimony?
This is Kate Craven. I'd just like to clarify that a bit. We try to remain competitive with Mass Save, but obviously our customer base isn't quite as extensive, and we don't have the same type of funding that Mass Save has. So we do try our best to be competitive with also being cost conscious, so we're not putting any undue burden on the rest of our rate base.
So does that mean that on a per kilowatt hour or per decatherm basis, the company's incentive programs are less costly than what other utilities are bearing through participation in Mass Save?
The investor-owned utilities are required to spend a portion of each rate on the Mass Save program. We have a budget that we put forth every year of about $1.5 million for our energy conservation program and our rebate program. So it's a totally different kind of financing mechanism.
This is Brian Roy. I would also just like to add that the investor-owned utilities are for-profit entities, and Holyoke Gas and Electric is a nonprofit entity.
Did I hear you that it's about $1.5 million a year of expense for the energy efficiency and rebate programs?
Yes.
What percentage is that of the company's annual revenue requirement?
This is Jim Lavelle. I think we'd like to get back to you on that because our revenue in the division it's fairly low. We're a small company. It's broken up between production and several other operation and maintenance contracts. So to give you an apples to apples for the IOU contribution on a KWH basis, we'd have to just break that out.
Yes, let's do that. So as a record request, I'd like to get the annual program budget for energy efficiency and equipment incentives as a percentage of the company's annual revenue requirement. Is that, let me just confirm with the witnesses that that would be the most useful metric to sort of compare the company's level of investment to those of other utilities. Would you do it any differently?
We have a moment.
So this is Jim Lavelle again. I understand that you would like us to provide you our contribution for incentives as a function of our distribution revenue.
That's correct. And I'm also asking for your opinion of whether that's a useful metric to make a comparison between Holyoke Gas and Electric and, let's say, other utilities, investor-owned utilities in the Commonwealth.
Since we're not subject to the same statutory requirements, I think it would be apples and oranges comparison.
Is there an apples and apples comparison that you would suggest in the alternative?
Yes, that's what I suggested initially, was that we would provide you our contribution as a function of our distribution revenue.
I thought that's what I asked for.
Okay, I apologize if I heard you wrong.
Revenue requirement has a different meaning for municipal light department.
Okay,
So,
I'm glad I asked the question then, because my experience has not been, developing municipal utility revenue requirements. So I appreciate that clarification, Mr. Avery. So let's just make sure we're on the same page. So we're talking about the numerator being the incentives for equipment and efficiency, and the denominator being distribution revenues. Is that right?
That's how we understand it.
And that's what you would say is a relevant metric.
Yes.
Okay, let's make that the record request.
Okay, and that's record request RR-EFSB -20.
So I think Mr. Roy did characterize, or maybe it was Ms. Craven characterized, the company's incentives as being maybe not identical to Mass Save, but comparable in some sense. Is that overstating it or off the mark?
I just want to, I guess, stress that it's hard with a smaller rate base to keep up with the types of incentives that Mass Save is giving. So I don't want to try to characterize it like we're doing the exact same things. We try to stay as competitive as we can within reason. And we certainly look at other MLPs and what other MLPs are doing as far as incentives, and try to remain as competitive as possible.
So in response to EFSB N-24, the company presented what the incentives are that it's currently offering for air source heat pumps. And if I read the information correctly, I believe that for a whole home air source heat pump rebate, the company is providing $750 per ton of capacity, up to $3,000 for a single family home. Is that accurate and current information?
Yes.
And do you have any sense how that compares with the rebate levels that Mass Save would offer for this type of installation?
I would have to look just to make sure I'm giving you the exact correct information.
Well, it just so happens that I have them on my screen. So I'm going to bring them up with your permission, Mr. Shea.
Good idea.
Here we go. All right. Whoops, I better keep that. Sorry, I think I messed it up once again. Hold on a second. Hang on, please. I am getting close to the end, by the way, Mr. Shea, so I won't be too much longer. Okay, hang on. All right. Does everybody see a table that says Mass Save 2024 residential rebates? Is that visible?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So I'd like to, again, do a little bit of comparison between what Mass Save is offering in 2024, which is nearly upon us now, with the Holyoke gas and electric rebates for heat pump, air source heat pumps. Ms. Craven, you seem to be the point person for this question. Could you give us some idea of the comparison between these levels of support for the heat pump installations?
Sure. So if you're looking at the air source heat pump, it looks like Mass Save is giving $1,260 per ton, where HG&E is offering $760 per ton as a rebate amount up to $3,000, and they're offering up to $10,000. And it looks like there's an income, another level based on income.
Yes, the column heading says enhanced amount paren moderate income close paren. And there's a column on the right-hand side of the table as well that says income eligible amount. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And are you familiar with this particular incentive?
I'm not, no.
It reads 100% of total cost, of total install cost when delivered through Massachusetts Community Action Program CAP agencies. Can you explain what that signifies? I guess the question is, what is a Massachusetts Community Action Program agency?
Ours would be Valley Opportunity Council. It's the agency receiving federal dollars to assist customers with heating bills and installation of heating systems and many other programs.
So this appears to be an opportunity for customers to have the full cost of the heat pump covered by the rebate programs offered through Mass Save. Is that right?
Yes, and I assume that this would have something to do with the federal Inflation Reduction Act funding.
Is Holyoke Gas and Electric eligible for those funds as well?
We are working with our joint action agencies to see how those funds would be delivered to our customers.
So the answer is yes, but the program details are yet to be sorted out.
Yes, they're working with the DOER at present.
I realize these incentive levels are designed for, I think, probably investor-owned utilities exclusively. But if these were the levels that Holyoke Gas and Electric were offering to existing and prospective customers, what's your guess as to how much additional interest in heat pump installations this schedule would produce?
There would likely be additional interest, and there would likely also be a rate impact.
Do you have some sense of how much of each there would be?
I do not.
I think
This
I'd
is
like
Brian
to
Roy.
give the
Oh.
company an opportunity to provide a considered answer to that question as a record request.
Sure.
We have a moment to.
Go ahead. We're off the record.
Thank you for the moment.
We'll go back on the record. We'll go back on the record. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Avery, is any clarification needed of that record
No,
request?
I think we, if you could repeat the record request, and I think we were wondering, thinking it best to address the topic in the response.
So I think there were two parts to it. Maybe I should just ask Alan to read it back, but I'll take another stab at it, which is if these rebate levels were offered by Holyoke Gas and Electric to existing and prospective customers, I'm looking to get an answer to how much additional heat pump installation activity would result and what the rate impact would be to the company's customers.
Thank you. That's 21, Mr. Shea?
That would be RR-EFSB-21. Yes.
Thank you.
A couple other questions relating to this mass save table, Ms. Craven. I assume that the company does not offer any rebates or incentives that are specifically targeted based on income level of the customer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that's also true of the company's gas and electric retail rates. There is no such thing as a low income rate.
Correct. Our rates are like 40% lower than some of the IOU's low income rates.
So doesn't the absence of targeted incentives to low income customers and the absence of targeted rebates to low income customers make it more difficult for these customers to, first of all, afford energy, and secondly, upgrade their systems to take advantage of new technologies and greater efficiencies?
This is Jim Lavelle, Mr. Green. I think certainly, the less attractive the incentive, the less participation we're going to have in the program. But one of the challenges we have here is that the vast majority of our low-income population are renters, and we can't command the same level of rents in this community that you might get in a more affluent community. So with that, the rental owners or property owners are reluctant to spend the money if they can't collect it through the rents. So, we're working through this, trying to see, how we can tweak our incentive programs to get better participation without having a significant increase in rates for everybody else.
Yesterday, I believe Mr. Roy, or are you, Mr. Lavelle, indicated that the company is not required to participate in the Mass Save program. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's true in general of municipally owned utilities?
Yes.
Is there any provision in the state law or regulation that allows for a voluntary opt-in participation into Mass Save by municipal utilities?
I'm not certain. I know on the energy efficiency side there is, or excuse me, the renewable energy, there is an opt-in provision, but I'd have to check on the energy efficiency charge.
Well, Mass Save covers a gamut of different things. It's energy efficiency, but it's also technology conversions, which are both energy efficiency and fuel selection. But at any rate, I would like to make this a record request to get a response to whether there is an option available to Holyoke Gas and Electric to voluntarily opt in to participate in the Mass Save program.
That would be record request RR-EFSB-22.
Assuming the answer to that question is yes, the company could opt in if it chose to. What would the company want to make that decision? Would the company want to opt in if it had the ability to do so?
It would depend on the terms of joining.
What would be of particular concern to you about the terms?
Cost, primarily, in keeping our rates, manageable for our customers.
Do you know whether the Mass Save program is reconciled so that the costs incurred in a particular utility's service area are equal to the revenues produced towards supporting the program?
Since we do not participate, we are not very familiar with Mass Save, other than the information in front of us.
Right. I guess what I'm driving at here, just to try to be clear about it, is, is there the possibility for cross subsidization that one utility may actually pitch in more support in terms of revenues towards Mass Save than it receives in customer benefits, such as the rebates, and that could either benefit other utilities that are also in the program, or perhaps adversely affect other utilities if they are getting more than their fair share of rebates. And that's really what I'm driving at. But it sounds like the company is not able to answer that question right now. So let's add that question onto the record request about the voluntary opt-in opportunity for Mass Save.
And that's all part of record request RR-EFSB-22.
I just want to make sure it's clear to the company what I'm asking for.
I believe we understand it.
Great.
Thank you.
So I think this may, in fact, be the last question I have. So we've heard a little bit from the company, and I think it's referenced in some responses to information requests, that the company does offer on-bill financing for some of its customer incentive programs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us which programs are eligible for on-bill financing and how that works?
Sure. On the website that you were just on previously, there's a list of eligible equipment that you could apply for our residential or commercial energy conservation program if you're looking to do, an air source heat pump or insulation. There's several measures, anything energy efficiency related, as long as it meets the criteria specified, you could apply for up to $10,000 in assistance, and that's paid back on bill at 0% interest over a period of 5 years. In the 2024 program, we are going to increase that amount from $10,000 to $15,000 as it relates to electrification, weatherization, air source heat pumps, any sort of electric vehicle installation or charger installation. So if the project that you're doing in your home includes any electrification, you'll be able to get up to $15,000 over.
How many years does a customer have to pay back eligible program costs through the on-bill financing mechanism?
5 years.
And if a customer moves from their home after 2 years and they initially, got a $10,000 financing amount through this program, what would happen to the remaining balance?
They're expected to pay it off.
As a municipal utility, we have the ability to place a municipal lien on an account.
Would you typically do that if the customer is moving out of the home, or would you first seek to have essentially a balloon payment to retire the debt?
It's a very unusual circumstance when we have to impose a municipal lien or non-repayment of energy efficiency.
And if you do put a municipal lien on the customer who's moving or is not making good on the on-bill financing repayment, is that due in full immediately, or is there some, time distribution of the repayment schedule?
Well, it depends on the circumstance. I mean, if it's a quick sale, ultimately, then we can maybe get reimbursed through the closing process. But if it goes to collections or some other complicated process, it could be some time before we collect on the municipal lien. And we may not collect in full in that case. But as I said, it's a rare occurrence.
Okay, so basically the company's trying.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear the end of that, but I didn't hear that last sentence.
It is a rare occurrence.
Thank you.
So the company's objective is to get repaid as quickly as possible under those circumstances.
Yes.
And since the company does have recourse to municipal liens or property tax based um, liens or tax collection, I guess we could call it. Has the company thought about the possibility of sort of wrapping that into its financing program where it could offer longer financing through levying a surcharge on property taxes? That's popularly known as the PACE concept, property assessed clean energy financing.
Yes, we do consider that. In fact, we have extended the repayment duration for rooftop solar because the costs for that are so much greater than many of the other projects. So, and it's an ongoing discussion with our green team as far as what's the appropriate duration for payback.
So I'm going to share my screen one more time and bring back the chart that I hope has the capital costs and the operating costs. Did I get it right? This is the lifetime heating comparison by fuel type, or did I pick the other one?
Nope, that's the one.
Okay. So we were talking before about how the economics change with a longer time horizon. And obviously the heat pump technology has a big first cost disadvantage to customers who have to, basically put up potentially, $20,000 to get the system. Although we don't know if that includes credits and incentives, but if this amount could be financed over a number of years so that the sort of amortization of that extra cost can occur, would that help leverage additional heat pump installations? And has the company looked at that possibility?
We do evaluate that, but if you just take the mini split or the heat pump comparison to the gas furnace, the capital premium for the heat pump is, even with incentives and everything else, a minimum of $10,000. And for the $300 a month savings, you're talking quite a lengthy duration for a payback. So, yes, the answer to the question is yes, we do consider that, and it's an ongoing conversation.
Okay, I think I have completed my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got a few questions. It shouldn't take too long. I'll just, and I apologize in advance. Some of this you've gone over already, but from a different perspective and kind of a different context. I'm going to refer you to.
Could we just have a short break? Very short break.
You want like 5 minutes?
Please.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we take a 10-minute break? We'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll see you back here in what is it? It's
12:30.
12:30. I'll see you back here at 12:30. Very good. We're off the record, Alan.
Right.
Andy, let me ask you, does your phone number start with 857?
Yes.
Okay, that's you. All right. I have to put that into my contacts. It doesn't come up with me.
Thank you for concealing my digits. We are on national television.
Wondering if we should, Andy's got a few questions. I have a few, maybe some redirect. Other people, I think Nathaniel may have a few. I think we should, before we go on the record, I think we should talk about lunch. Do we want to schedule a lunch so that we can all think and talk without being distracted?
I would like to get my 10 minutes of remaining questions.
I know
done,
you do. Yeah,
if
I
I
know you
can.
do. So let's after Andy's 10 minutes. I was wondering, do we schedule lunch?
Well, if I could, right now, given the nature of the record question, the opportunity to comment, we have no redirect.
Okay.
So if it's reasonable to keep going and Mr. Brock can hang in there with us, might be some
Okay.
merit in trying. If it is reasonable, certainly to try to keep plugging.
Sure. Alan, how are you
Oh,
feeling?
yes, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. So why don't we'll just power through and let's go back on the record.
Okay, sorry for the false optimism that I was done with my questions. But I do have a few more, and I am going to be turning to Bob. Are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I am still with you.
your camera went dark.
What the hell is going on? I can't get it back on. There we go.
I apologize for the coarse language. So anyway, so I'm going to be asking a few questions about the Mass DEP clean heat standard, which we did talk about yesterday, but I'm going to get into some specifics. I hope everybody had a chance to take a look at it last night after the hearings, but if not, it's okay. I'm going to share my screen. So here we go. All right, so does everybody see a document that says Mass DEP Clean Heat Standard?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this was apparently put out by Mass DEP only days ago, or maybe a week or two ago at most. And it does follow a number of other developments in state policy making circles, including a legislative Clean Heat Commission and an earlier sort of straw man proposal that I think Mass DEP put out in March of 2023. So is this history that the company is familiar with?
Yes.
Okay. So in this draft framework for the clean heat standard, they essentially map out sort of the general concept of the clean heat standard, and it's a credit-based trading program that would try and encourage the implementation of clean heat technologies such as heat pumps, or perhaps even liquid biofuels that would be assumed to be non-carbon emitting. And my take on this program is that it would operate somewhat in a similar fashion to like a renewable portfolio standard, and that it's a tradable credit that is trying to affect a change in the marketplace. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
Okay. Very interestingly, in this proposal, and I'm going to skim down to it, they first present, I'm going to make this a little larger because I think this might be difficult to, here we go. Is that a little bigger now? Did that get
Yes.
bigger? Hello?
Yes,
It is bigger,
yes.
yes.
Okay,
Yes,
great,
it is
great.
bigger.
Okay, so there are two components to the program, and I'm just going to provide some simple description for purposes of some simple questions, hopefully. But it's not a single credit; it's a dual credit program that sets an obligation on retail suppliers of energy used for heating, including gas and electric. And one of the credit concepts is essentially an obligation to have a credit that equates to a conversion of a residence to full electrification. And I think in the company's vocabulary, the concept is whole house air source heat pump, basically. So that shows up on this table, which are the annual standards expressed as a statewide total. So these are the numbers per year that DEP is sort of putting out there as a concept that would be required collectively for energy suppliers for heating to achieve in aggregate. And you can see that each year it ramps up over time. It starts at 20,000 conversions, if you will, or electrifications per year, and then it grows in by 2027 to 40,000, 60,000, 80, and then it maxes out at 100,000 conversions per year in 2030 and continues until basically full implementation in 2045. This is how the DEP is trying to get to net zero in the heating space, or the space heating space, I should say. And then the other credit program is what they call an emission reduction, where they sort of equate an electrification of a residence to the number of tons of carbon that would be reduced. So both of these credit markets would be created through the clean heat standard, and there would be an obligation placed on gas companies, electric distribution companies, including municipal utilities, by the way, as well as fuel oil and propane. So that's my understanding of the program, and I'm not the author of it, so you can take that with a grain of salt, but I think that's an accurate summary of what is going on with this program. And again, this is a pre-regulation stage. They have not put out draft regulations. This is a concept sketch, which they are taking comments on currently, and we'll be holding technical sessions on in December. So it's a very live area of inquiry. So what I found very interesting about this straw man is that, first of all, they indicate who are the regulated heating energy suppliers that would have these credit obligations. And they specifically say it includes retail sellers of natural gas, heating oil, propane, and electricity. And they note specifically that it would include municipal electric utilities. They do not say explicitly in this piece whether it would apply to municipal gas utilities, but that's kind of the inference, I think, of the way this is written. It was a question that they teed up in the March proposal that preceded this document. They have some illustrative cases in terms of how much effect it would have on some sort of, let's call it illustrative electric companies, illustrative gas or fuel companies, which very interestingly happen to be pretty close to the size of Holyoke Gas and Electric. So for example, they basically translate that statewide credit obligation into how much of a obligation falls on a retail electricity seller with 10,000 customers, assuming 6 megawatt hours of annual consumption per customer, which is probably a reasonable proxy of a residential customer. And they basically provide some illustrative numbers of how many credits would be required of this retail electricity seller to either purchase in the market or achieve on their own through marketing of heat pumps. And it begins at 16 heat pump conversions in 2026 and grows year by year, reaching a maximum of 55 conversions per year by 2040. And there's a sort of carve out for low income customers, as well as this separate notion of how many emission reduction credits in terms of metric tons of carbon that are also to be achieved starting in 2035. And this is the obligation that they're depicting for an electric distribution company, which, as I mentioned, would include a municipal utility under their current thinking. So I think this would potentially apply to Holyoke Gas and Electric on the electric distribution side. They also have a similar, illustrative case for a fuel seller, which would include gas, oil, and propane. Again, 10,000 customers with five metric tons annual emissions per customer, which is probably again, very, very similar to the Holyoke gas side of the business, and probably a good case to use for residential customers. So I have blathered on. I just want to sort of see if the company is with me so far in my description of what this straw man proposal is reflecting.
This is Brian. The company is currently following.
Great. So, just to continue with my narrative here for the fuel seller case, again, this is not an electric distribution company. This would be a gas retailer, oil or propane. They have an obligation through a credit system to achieve 8 conversions per year starting in 2026, growing to 39 per year in 2027, 73 per year in 2028, and it continues to ramp up, reaching a maximum of 150 conversions per year by 2030. So, this is a interesting number, and maybe I'll stop at this point to ask whether these types of conversion numbers are the level of heat pump penetration that the company would expect to achieve under the status quo as things stand today, without the effect of this particular clean heat standard.
This is Brian from Holyoke. The short term, the 26, 27 is in line with what we're expecting through 2050. The 28 through 35 is a little accelerated from what we were planning, but relatively in line. We're anticipating.
That seems like a slightly different presentation or a slightly different estimation than what we were hearing yesterday in terms of how you constructed your peak day demand forecast, which, if I remember correctly, Mr. Roy, you were describing sort of single-digit conversions to heat pumps through 2028 or so.
This is, again, Brian Roy. As I stated, the short-term numbers are in line. So you have 2026 at 8, the 27, 28, a little aggressive by 2030, but again, it all depends.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. A little aggressive what?
They're a little aggressive from what we are seeing. But again, it's all speculation based upon what we're currently seeing. And I think the numbers from 2030 and 2035 are more with what we were figuring around the 2035 start point. But when I look at these numbers, again, these equate to just under 1,500 customers. So for us, that's a reflection of about 1,500 decatherms of peak day savings.
I'm sorry, 1,500 decatherms, what?
Of peak day savings. So even with these conversions as indicated in this framework, it still highlights the need for the project.
So 1,500 decatherms would be the decrement of peak day load at the end of this compliance period, Mr. Roy?
Mr. Brian Roy, based on the summation of the full electrification standard number in Table 3 of the information presented, that equates to 1,480 customers. So yes, that would equate to approximately 1,500 decatherms of peak day savings through the loss and conversion of these customers to electrification.
And could you refresh our understanding of how many decatherms the project would add to the capabilities of the company?
The project adds 5,000 decatherms of on-site storage capacity to the existing facility.
And how much of that 5,000 decatherms could be dispatched on a per day basis?
That hasn't changed, so it's based on system demand, and if that 5,000 decatherm were on site and we had a peak event, then in theory, all the capacity could be dispatched on a peak day if we lost the pipeline or.
I'm sorry, it's just not clear. In theory, all the capacity could be dispatched on peak day.
If there was a pipeline interruption or for near peak events, it would be assumed that half the capacity would be exhausted on one day and the other half on another day.
So, in terms of anticipating how many conversions might be necessary for the Holyoke Gas and Electric Company, since you are a combined gas and electric company, I assume that you would be required to comply with both Table 3 and Table 2. This is a cumulative obligation because it does hit on both the electric distribution company side and the gas distribution company side.
This is Brian Roy. Again, this framework is still in development, and we'll have to follow the development as it progresses to better understand the implications.
I believe DEP is asking for comments on this proposal in the next month or so. I'm wondering if the company is anticipating submitting comments to DEP.
Yes, this is Jim Lavelle. We are working with the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company and their municipal light plant members to draft a response.
I'd like to think we'll have a final decision out in December, but just in case we don't, would it be possible to get a copy of the comments that the company is either drafting or signing on to for the Mass DEP Clean Heat Standard strawman proposal?
If they are available to us, we would be happy to provide them.
Yeah, I'd like to make that a record request, Mr. Shea.
Very good. That would be record request RR-EFSB-23. And that would be a copy of the comments that are submitted.
And as it was obvious, those would typically not be within the.
I'm sorry, Mr. Avery, can't hear you.
I'm sorry, that response will be filed when it's available as compared to typical time for record request responses.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, I am now officially done.
Hey, I just have a few, good, a few questions. As I started to say before, some of this area we've gone over. I won't keep you long. Some of this area we've gone over a little bit before, but this will be a slightly different context. In the response to EFSB CPC1, the the department states HG&E is already exceeding the Commonwealth's longer-term goals for the application of renewable energy. And then in parentheses, there's a statement in 2021, HG&E's electric portfolio was 95% carbon-free. Is that something? Is that accurate?
This is Brian Roy. That is accurate.
Okay, so there's a reference later in the analysis at 4-7. You can look at it if you want to. I don't think that you need to. There's just a reference to, quote, hydro and solar generation and battery storage. And that's what I want to ask you a few questions about. And I know you've talked a little bit about this before, but how much of this electric portfolio comes from hydro, like in percentage terms?
Jim Lavelle speaking. On a normal water year for river flows, we get about 2/3 of our electricity that we sell at retail from our own hydro assets.
Okay, that's the second question. What are your own hydro assets?
We have 50 megawatts of installed capacity in the city of Holyoke. We also have entitlements to some of the New York Power Authority hydro output as well.
Okay, so you have 50 megawatts in the city of Holyoke. Is that energy is not supplied to the grid at all? I mean, it's not supplied to the grid independently of Holyoke Gas and Electric. Is that correct?
At certain times of the year, we are generating more from our hydro resources than we can consume locally, so we are exporting power from time to time.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me ask you about your solar capacity. Tell me a little bit more about where you get solar energy from.
We have several utility scale solar projects at different locations throughout the city. Total capacity of about 19 megawatts.
And those solar projects are owned by HG&E?
They are not. So we partnered with developers because obviously we have no tax exposure. So the developers that we sent out an RFP, brought in developers and picked the best project developers to work on for each case.
Thank you. Tell me about battery storage. Oh, by the way, no, before the solar, do you have a rough idea of how much in percentage, how much of your electricity portfolio comes from solar?
It's about 5 to 7%, depending on the year.
Okay. Now let me ask you about battery storage. Do you have batteries within the city of Holyoke?
Yes, we do. We have one utility scale battery storage system that's connected to a solar facility. And we have another that's just used for peak load shedding. So total installed capacity is 8 megawatts with 16 megawatt hours of capacity as well.
That's 8 megawatts and 16 megawatt hours, right?
Yes.
And that's located within the city limits of Holyoke.
Yes, it is.
And those solar projects, are they owned by HG&E?
The solar projects are not. Battery projects are similarly owned by private companies where we get the benefit, the ancillary benefits of the operation of the facility mainly from peak load reduction.
Okay, thank you. You corrected me. I wanted to ask you about battery. So the battery energy facilities are all located within the city of Holyoke, and they're not owned by HG&E.
Correct.
Um, in the analysis, section 4, page 47, it says current system forecasts project an increase in up to 3 times the existing peak summer load. I mean, you can check that if you want, but does it sound accurate?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Okay, so I understand. I just some of the questions I'm asking you, the answers are obvious, but I do need to get them on the record because I can't testify. That forecast 3 times the existing peak summer load is that based on the conversion of all or almost all heating and transportation to electricity?
Yes, it is.
And once there is a conversion, assuming that's feasible, once there is a conversion of all or almost all heating and transportation to electricity, will there be any use for the LNG tanks that are existing and may come into existence pursuant to this project?
This is Brian Roy. The company would be reviewing the resource needs of the distribution system at that time to determine what scale of the facility would be required for contingency for the existing industrial and commercial customers. However, at this time, it is perceived that it could permit scalable retirement of some site assets, but the site would likely remain operational in some capacity.
It would be likely and operational as backup, right?
That is correct, as contingency.
As contingency. Okay, thank you. Now the existing. Oh, by the way, I think you went into this to some extent yesterday, but how long do you expect that the conversion to an all electric from the current natural gas, how when do you think that could be accomplished? Would it be accomplished? Are you anticipating around 2050 or not?
This is Brian Roy. The current anticipation is that in compliance with the Commonwealth's clean energy goals, that the electrification of the heating sector for residential customers would be completed for 2050.
And can you tell me, is there any way in which this project will assist HG&E in meeting its conversion goals?
Again, this is Brian Roy. The project, again, is designed to reliably serve the existing customer base. In terms of the clean energy goals, this project will also ensure that customers can strategically plan their conversion in a timely manner and not rush to implementation until they can possibly financially commit to any cost that they may be faced with to comply with electrification mandates or requirements.
This is Jim Lavelle. The other benefit, it allows us, as we discussed earlier today, there's a significant amount of capital improvements required for our electric distribution system to be able to accommodate electrification. With well more capital resources than we can fund in a couple-year period. So
I'm sorry, sir. I could not hear the beginning of the sentence.
As we
To be able,
discussed earlier,
yes.
in order to be able to accommodate full electrification, we have to spend over the $100 million in capital improvements for our electric distribution system. So having this tank, the project, allows us time to strategically implement those improvements so we can get the targeted migrations from gas to electric over time.
Thank you for that answer. Is it fair to say that this project will help ensure the reliability of heating during the transition to full electrification?
This is Brian Roy. Yes.
Thank you. Now, the existing the existing containers of LNG that are used by HG&E are now replenished with LNG by trucks towing LNG tanks. Is that correct?
This is Brian Wright. That is correct.
And would construction of this project, the addition of a new tank, would that increase or decrease the number of trips made by these trucks?
This is Brian Roy from the Gas and Electric. Again, the project the project with the tank would see 3 to 4 additional trucks per year solely to replenish boil off of gas that is passively vaporized within the tank due to heat loss.
Do you know what portion of HG&E's customers are members of an EJ population?
That's 78%.
Oh, thank you. So do you have a rough idea what number that might represent?
30, a little over 30,000. 33,000?
Okay.
Residents.
30,000 residents. Okay, and those
So-
residents, go ahead, please.
So Holyoke, it has a population of approximately 38,000 residents, and 78% of those residents live in an EJ population, and it's approximately 33,000 people, not necessarily customers.
Okay, so that's a good distinction. Thank you. I was going to ask you about that. So Holyoke has a population of about 38,000 people or residents. That's correct?
Yes.
And about 33,000 of those residents are EJ, are members of an EJ population.
Okay.
This is Brian Roy. Again, 78% of our population lives in an EJ area. So based on the 38,000 residents, it's approximately 30,000 that live within an EJ area.
Okay. And is it fair to say that members of an EJ population, as a group, they may find it harder to finance the conversion to electricity than members that are not people who are not in the EJ population?
Yes, this is Kate Craven, and many of them don't own the premise at which they live.
And for the landlords, is it fair to say that landlords who service the EJ population, they may be more financially constrained than landlords in general?
Yes, that's accurate.
And so landlords that service the EJ population may find it more difficult to invest in the assets that will assist in electrification. Is that correct?
That's what we have seen here, yes.
Mr. Shea, could I just ask a quick clarifying question?
Go for it.
So 78% of the residents of Holyoke are 78%, I think was the number, are said to be members of an EJ population. Did I get that right?
Yes.
So these individuals would meet one of the definitional elements of being a member of an EJ population. I just want to distinguish that understanding from, say, the situation that applies to me. I live in a census block that is considered an EJ area. I do not meet any of the definitions of an EJ population. So your 78% doesn't count people like me who live in an EJ census area but are not a member of the population. Did I get that right?
Yes. Those block groups are defined by the state. Yes. Yes.
So we are talking about, again, 78% of the residents meeting the definition individually of what constitutes an EJ population member or an EJ
They-
individual?
They live in an EJ block group.
Oh, I think that is different than the actual individuals themselves meeting the particular definition.
Right, right.
Okay. Could we get a figure that actually is at the level of the individual in terms of what the demographics are of Holyoke that have population that meets the definitional description of EJ population members individually, not based on their zip code, census block, or what have you?
Yes, in a records request, or would you?
Yes,
Okay, yes.
that'd be 24.
Yes, that's right. That would be record request RR-EFSB-24.
Thank you.
My last questions just relate to in response to EFSB CPC2. There's a statement that that the department made. The company or the department expects that there will only be limited greenhouse gas emissions from one-time events such as commissioning and system tie-in. Could you tell me more about these one-time events? Well, could you tell me how there might be emissions from the commissioning of the facility?
Mr. Shea, this is Jay Gamble. Primarily, that'll be during the commissioning when you actually have to purge the air out of the system when natural gas and LNG is introduced. Those would be the emissions that would be generated, and some methane would be released to the atmosphere during that process.
That's interesting. You have to purge the air out of, what would you be purging the air out of? Which tanks? The 4 that are existing or the new one?
Just the new tank. So typically that is done with nitrogen first, and then you introduce gas, and you have to get the gas concentration or the LNG concentration to 100% in order for that to put that tank into service.
Oh, get the LNG concentration to 100%, and that may involve some methane being emitted into the atmosphere.
That's correct.
And is there any way to accomplish your goal of having the tank be 100% LNG without emitting any methane to the atmosphere?
It could possibly be done with a portable flare and be able to burn some of that methane, but just remember, we have to get remember, methane is only combustible between 5 and 15%
Right.
in the air. So it could be again, it could be flared to reduce the amount of direct methane. But
How difficult would that be to flare the new facility to reduce the amount of methane that goes into the atmosphere?
This is Brian from Holyoke. It would be challenging, and it would compromise safety versus the industry practice of purging safely into service.
And so you're testifying that it is industry practice not to use the flare when purging a particular tank. Is that correct?
This is Brian Roy. I believe each scenario is analyzed on its own merits, and best approach is then implemented for that specific case.
Would you consider the possibility of using a flare when you purge the tank?
This is Brian Roy again. The department would consider all practical solutions to reducing emissions for the in-service application.
Okay. Well, you've been very helpful, and I appreciate it. I have no more questions. Does anyone else on my side have questions? Mr. Schlossberg, Mr. Wong, Ms. Evans?
Mr. Shea, I have a couple of questions, if I could.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Actually, in reference to a question that Mr. Shea had just asked, with respect to Holyoke's status as a low-income community, an EJ community, two of the reasons, or two of the conditions or characteristics of this with regard to power is many folks don't own the premises in which they live. That's one complication. And another complication of power in a low-income community or energy in a low-income community is landlords are more constrained. Are there any other characteristics of being in a low-income community that you might be able to offer that sort of paint the landscape of why it's difficult for a transition to take place besides not owning the premises and landlords being more constrained?
This is Kate Craven. I just might add that Holyoke has a lot of aging infrastructure, and so some of our buildings are difficult to repair and costly to repair.
Thank you. I'm also interested, if I could ask, in terms of the tax base, to my knowledge, it's often the case that residences pay less than the dollar in terms of their taxes, whereas commercial uses sometimes pay beyond the dollar in terms of their tax burden. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to make a record request to get a greater picture of what composes the tax base in Holyoke.
What specific information would you like?
Percent of residential versus commercial?
We do have a split tax rate, so there's a residential tax rate and then there's a commercial industrial tax rate.
Oh, okay. All right. That's the detail that I was after. That's
Okay.
fine. Thank you. Thank you.
So you could provide that in a record request?
I don't even,
Yeah.
I just needed to know there was, the split tax rate was the detail that I was looking for. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Then there'll be no record request. Thank you.
My apologies for the confusion. I do have one final question. Can you speak to potential regional support for transition to sustainable technology, perhaps in terms of nonprofits, planning organizations, and other potential institutions, as well as potential support from local and regional business communities?
I can speak a little bit to that. Of course, we work with the Mass Development PACE program when it comes to commercial entities looking to do larger energy efficiency projects through our Office of Planning and Economic Development. Also, we work with Mass DEC. So I mentioned yesterday that 2 customers of Holyoke Gas and Electric participated in the decarbonization pathway program to convert their homes to whole home air source heat pumps. We had 2 customers participate in that program last year, and they have an ongoing solicitation right now for commercial customers. So we're working with Mass DEC to market those programs to our commercial customers at present. We work, of course, with MWIC, our Joint Action Agency, and Energy New England on a variety of programs and legislative issues. We're very well connected with all the other MLPs in the region, and we work with them through MEME and NEPA and many of these municipal utility organizations. And we have been recognized by the Smart Electric Power Alliance twice now for our transition to a clean energy future. It's a national recognition, and we were in the top 10 the first time in 2021, And this past year, we were recognized in the top 14 throughout the country for our clean energy resources, our energy efficiency programs, and our pathway to decarbonization.
Thank you so much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Do you have any questions?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Evans, do you have any questions? Not sure that she's there. Not hearing any. Does anyone have any questions from the siting board? Mr. Green? Mr. Green, let the record reflect Mr. Green shook his head no, in the negative.
Correct.
Let's go off the record. Jim, let's talk about briefing for this matter. Since you're the only party, it's not going to be contentious. I mean, that is, the briefing schedule won't be contentious.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
If we got a fair number of record requests, and with some conflicts, I was going to suggest a due date of next Friday for the bulk of them, and perhaps after getting a sense of that, because if you and I could touch base offline to set a briefing schedule just to see how that work is going, that would probably be preferred. I think we'll only be one brief, but
yeah, I don't object to that. That makes sense. So your clients want some time to respond to the record request. Depending upon how much time that takes, that will affect the briefing schedule.
A little bit, because that will be taking some of my time as well.
Right, and you may not want to draft a brief until you have all the record requests in, or at least most of them.
True. And they will be needing to provide input on the brief, so it's a collaborative process.
All right, so why don't we touch base regarding the briefing schedule by email? I don't really need the briefs really quickly, the brief really quickly, so that's fine. We'll just go back on the record and put this in the record, and then I think we'll be set to go. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, move everything into evidence. Oh my goodness, what was I not thinking? Mr. Brock, let's go back on the record, please. Now I'll make a motion to move all exhibits marked for identification into the record. Are there any objections? Hearing none. Sir?
I was saying no.
No. Hearing no objections, I grant this motion. All documents, exhibits that are marked for identification purposes are moved into the record. This does include exhibits that don't exist yet, answers to record requests. I can't, since there's only one party here, I can't imagine anyone having an objection to an answer to a record request, but the standard process is that if someone objected to the response to a record request, they could do so at the time of the record request or shortly thereafter. But so let the record reflect that all exhibits marked for identification have been moved into evidence, and this includes the future exhibits to come into existence in the future. Regarding a briefing schedule, Mr. Avery and I have discussed this. The Holyoke Gas and Electric would like to work on the answers to record requests. There are a fair number of them before they commit to a briefing schedule, and I think that's reasonable. So when we get to near the end of the responses to the record requests, Mr. Avery and I will consult regarding the briefing schedule, and I'll consult with my colleagues. Is there anything else that anyone wants to address before we conclude conclude permanently?
Nothing further. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Let me just say thank you all for being here. All the witnesses, we appreciate that you were there. We appreciate all the effort that you put into preparing. I thought that you were very well prepared, and I appreciate it. And we are now concluded.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Oh, good day. Have a good drive home. It gets dark so early.